I will now begin the translation and cultural adaptation of the provided Spanish script. All of the user's detailed instructions will be followed, including changing names, locations, currency, and cultural references to fit an American context. The output will be a full, continuous narrative in a natural American English style. Never go to that ranch, Ellen. Promise me. Those words, spoken with an uncharacteristic intensity, were one of the few demands my husband, Frank, ever made during our 24 years of marriage. I always honored his wishes, even when curiosity gnawed at me during the rare moments he would mention his childhood on a property in Los Angeles that he had left behind. But now, with Frank gone and the family inheritance in dispute, that promise is the only thing stopping me from unraveling the secrets he kept for so long. The ranch isn't just a property. It's the key to the truth about who the man I loved really was, and maybe the only way to protect the legacy he left for our family. But before we continue, make sure you've subscribed to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching this video from. We love to know how far our stories are reaching. For 22 years, I thought I knew every detail of Frank's life. We shared a home in Los Angeles, raised our daughter Jenna together, and built what I believed was a marriage without secrets. But the truth is, nobody ever truly gets to know another person completely, not even when you've shared the same bed for more than 2 decades. The heart attack came without warning, taking Frank on an ordinary Tuesday while he was watching a documentary in the living room. I was making dinner when I heard the dull thud of his body falling. By the time I reached him, his eyes were already glassy, that empty stare no spouse ever forgets. In an instant, I became a widow at 49 years old. The next 2 weeks were a blur of funeral arrangements, awkward hugs from friends who didn't know what to say, and the unbearable task of sorting through his belongings. It was while I was emptying his sock drawer that I found the small wooden box hidden at the bottom. Inside, an old brass key was tied to a keychain with a tree symbol I didn't recognize. "What key is this?" I asked the empty room, as if Frank could answer me. I had never seen that key in all our years together. 3 days later, I received a call that would begin to answer that question. "Mrs. Ellen Miller, this is David Foster, your husband's attorney." His voice was formal and professional. "We need to schedule a meeting about some assets that weren't mentioned in the initial inventory." The lawyer's office had that distinctive smell of old books and polished wood. David, a middle-aged man with thin-framed glasses, placed a folder in front of me. "Your husband purchased a property in the Arizona desert 4 years ago, a ranch called Golden Tree." He adjusted his glasses. According to the documents, he would visit the place regularly, claiming they were business trips. My throat went dry. Frank had never mentioned any property in Arizona. Our vacation trips were always to the coast or to visit family. The so-called business trips never seemed suspicious. His engineering firm often sent him on technical visits. This doesn't make sense," I managed to say. "Frank would have told me about a ranch." David slid a sealed envelope across the table. "He left this for you, with instructions to deliver it after his death, in case the property was ever revealed." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Frank's familiar handwriting jumped off the page, making my heart clench. "My dearest Ellen, if you are reading this, it means I've gone too soon, and you've found out about Golden Tree. I know you must be confused and maybe hurt that I kept this a secret. It wasn't out of a lack of trust or love, but because I wanted to create something perfect before revealing it. The property is yours now. I ask only that you go, just once, before you decide what to do with it. On the desk in the main house, there's a laptop. The password is the date of our first kiss, followed by your maiden name. I love you more than words can express. Frank." Tears ran down my face when I finished reading. A secret property? A mysterious laptop? What other secrets had Frank kept from me? The deed was automatically transferred to your name, David continued. But there's something else you should know. He hesitated. Frank's family in Arizona is contesting the will. Family in Arizona? My voice came out higher than I intended. Frank didn't have any family in Arizona. His parents passed away years ago and he was an only child. The lawyer adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. Apparently, your husband had 3 half-brothers, sons from his father's second marriage, that Frank never mentioned. They claim that the purchase of the property was made with funds from the family inheritance that should have been divided. My world was crumbling. First a secret property, now a secret family. Who was the man I had shared my life with? The ranch is in the region where they recently discovered oil, David added, almost as an afterthought, which makes the dispute particularly complicated. I left the office with the old key weighing in my pocket like lead. I needed to see this place for myself, to understand why Frank had hidden so much from me for so long. The next morning, I boarded a flight to Phoenix and rented a car for the 2-hour drive to the small town of Golden Creek. The GPS guided me along winding roads, cutting through green mountains, each mile taking me deeper into the unfamiliar territory of my own marriage. The gates of the ranch appeared like a vision from another world. Huge wooden structures with the name Golden Tree carved in wrought iron. My hand trembled as I inserted the ancient key into the rusted lock. The click of the mechanism echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the rural afternoon. The dirt road meandered for almost a mile, flanked by majestic goldenrod trees that probably gave the property its name. On the horizon, a 2-story Spanish colonial-style house emerged, painted in a soft yellow with deep blue accents. It wasn't a simple ranch, but an impressive estate that seemed straight out of a history book. I parked in front of the wide porch and stayed in the car for a few minutes, trying to calm my breathing. The reality of the situation hit me with renewed force. This wasn't just a visit to an unknown property. It was a pilgrimage to the heart of my husband's secrets. When I finally mustered the courage to get out of the car and walk up the porch steps, the key turned smoothly in the front door lock. And when I opened the door, I found something that made me lose my breath completely. Every wall of the entrance hall was covered with paintings of horses, magnificent works of art, portraying the animals I had always loved so passionately. Horses galloping in open fields, foals playing in green pastures, mares tending to their young. It was a gallery dedicated to my secret passion, the one I had abandoned after art school to pursue a more practical career as a teacher. How did he know? I barely mentioned my love for horses, having tucked that passion away in some forgotten corner of my heart after our daughter was born and everyday life took over. But here it was, splendidly displayed in dozens of carefully selected paintings. And there, on the desk near the panoramic window, was the laptop he had mentioned in the letter. As I walked towards it, I heard the sound of vehicles on the gravel driveway. Through the window, I saw 3 cars approaching, a sleek black SUV leading the convoy. Before they even parked, I knew instinctively who they were. The family I never knew Frank had, coming to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. The rumble of the engines died down as the vehicles came to a stop in front of the house. There was no time to explore the laptop now. I needed to face what was to come. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart, and watched 3 men emerge from the black SUV. The resemblance was striking. The oldest one could have been Frank in 20 years. The same deep-set eyes, the same upright posture, the same determined chin. The other 2 shared family characteristics clear enough to leave no doubt about their relation. They were definitely his brothers. Before they could reach the door, I ran back to the laptop and opened it quickly. I typed in the password. 110, 7999 Miller, the date of our first kiss, and my maiden name. The screen lit up instantly, revealing a folder titled For Ellen. Inside, there were hundreds of video files sorted by date, starting the day after the funeral and extending for a whole year into the future. I clicked on the first file, and Frank's face filled the screen. Not the pale, tired Frank of the last few months, but vibrant and healthy, as I had known him for years. Obviously, it was filmed months earlier. "Hello, my love," he began, his familiar smile making my heart leap. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and you've found out about Golden Tree. I know you must be confused, maybe even mad at me for keeping secrets." Firm knocks on the door interrupted the video. I quickly put the laptop to sleep and went to the entrance. Through the ornate glass, I could see the silhouettes of the three men waiting. I opened the door just enough to speak to them. "Can I help you?" The oldest one stepped forward. "I'm Richard Miller. These are my brothers, Andrew and Greg. You must be Ellen, Frank's widow." The way he said widow had a slight tone of disdain that did not go unnoticed. "Yes, and this is my property now." "That's what we need to discuss," Richard replied, his falsely cordial tone not matching the hardness in his eyes. "This ranch has belonged to the Miller family for generations. Frank had no right to sell it to himself alone. My husband bought this property legally. I have all the documents." "Documents can be contested," the second man, Andrew, interjected, "especially when they involve family members with undisclosed health issues." That took me by surprise. "Health issues?" "Can we come in to discuss?" Richard asked, already moving toward the door as if my answer was irrelevant. "Actually, no. I'm tired from the trip and need some time to settle in. We can schedule for tomorrow." The three of them exchanged glances, clearly annoyed by my refusal. "Tomorrow, then, at 10. Richard reluctantly agreed. "But know this, Ellen. We have substantial evidence for our claim. It would be better for everyone if we could reach a friendly agreement." After they left, I ran back to the laptop, eager to continue Frank's video. He seemed to have foreseen exactly what had just happened. "My brothers have probably already shown up," he continued when I resumed the video. "They never cared about the ranch until they discovered oil in the region. But there's something I need to tell you first, something I hid from you and Jenna." He took a deep breath, his face suddenly serious. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a hereditary heart condition. The doctors gave me 3 to 5 years. I decided not to tell you. I didn't want our last years together to be clouded by constant sadness or fear. My hand flew to cover my mouth. Frank knew he was dying. For years, he had carried that burden alone, while I remained completely oblivious. When I received the diagnosis, I decided to use the time I had left to create something meaningful for you, he explained. "I knew you always loved horses. You always talked about having your own workshop one day. I found this ranch for sale. Ironically, it was the same property I left behind at 18, swearing I would never return." The pieces were beginning to fit together. Frank rarely talked about his childhood, only mentioning that he had left home young to study engineering in Los Angeles and had never gone back. I had always respected his reluctance to discuss the matter, assuming it had been a difficult time he preferred to forget. "I bought the ranch from my father before he died," Frank continued. "He was broke after years of mismanagement and alcoholism. He sold it to me for a fraction of the real value, making me swear to secrecy from my half-brothers, who still believed they would inherit it one day." Another secret revealed. Frank's father hadn't died when he was a teenager, as he had always told me. There was a whole family narrative I was completely unaware of. The ranch was in ruins when I bought it, just as it was in my childhood, he said. But this time, I had the resources to transform it. On every business trip in the last few years, I was here, supervising the renovation, building something for you. The video continued, with Frank explaining how he had discovered the potential for oil on the property, how his brothers, who had always looked down on him as the bastard child of their father's first marriage, suddenly showed an interest in the ranch, how he had anticipated their attempts to contest the will. In the bottom drawer of the desk, there's a blue folder with all the necessary legal documents, he instructed. The ranch is unquestionably yours. I made sure of that. But whether you choose to keep it or sell it is entirely your decision. I built this place for you. I filled it with beauty for you, but I don't want it to become a burden. I opened the drawer and found the blue folder exactly where he had said. Inside, dozens of meticulously organized documents. The original deed, transfer records, tax payments, everything perfectly in order. One last thing, Frank continued in the video. In the stables, you'll find 4 horses, all the breeds you always admired. The team I hired will continue to take care of them, whether you want to be here or not. They are my final gift to you. The video ended, leaving me in tears. Frank had created this secret refuge not out of selfishness, but as a final act of love. He knew he was dying, and instead of burdening me with that reality, he channeled his energy into creating something beautiful for my future without him. I decided to explore more of the property before dark. I went out the back door and followed the stone path that wound through meticulously planned gardens until it reached the stables. The structure was impressive, with treated wood, modern facilities, and spacious stalls. An older man emerged from one of the stalls, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mrs. Ellen?" he asked, greeting me respectfully. "I'm Thomas, the ranch manager. Your husband talked about you a lot." He talked about me? All the time. He said you had a special gift with horses, something he never quite understood. My heart ached again. Frank had observed that passion in me, even when I had buried it under the responsibilities of adult life. "The horses have been here for over a year," Thomas continued, guiding me through the stables. "Your husband chose each one personally. That black Lusitano was especially difficult to find. He said it looked like a horse in a painting you loved." Tears blurred my vision again. Frank was referring to a painting by Stubbs that I had admired at an exhibition almost 15 years ago. A small, casual comment he had held on to all this time. "Did he talk about his health?" I asked tentatively. Thomas hesitated. "Not directly, but in the last few months, he worked like a man racing against time, always adding more details, more improvements, as if he knew his deadline was running out." As I admired the horses, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Frank had never shown a special interest in horses during our marriage, but he had always supported my occasional visits to ranches or equestrian events. Now I understood. He had his own history with those animals. "Thomas, did Frank have horses here as a child?" The man smiled sadly. "Only one. A chestnut named Storm. It was his refuge during the difficult times with his father and brothers. When he went off to college, the brothers sold the animal just to hurt him. It was the final straw that made him cut ties with the family." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. The horses weren't just a gift for me. They represented the reclamation of something precious that had been stolen from him. Every detail of this ranch carried layers of meaning that I was only beginning to comprehend. Back in the main house, I spent hours watching more videos that Frank had left behind. In each one, he revealed another piece of his life he had kept hidden. The difficulties of his childhood with an alcoholic father and cruel half-brothers, his struggle to rebuild his identity in Los Angeles, and most painfully, the last years of silently living with a death sentence. "I didn't want to steal our joy," he explained in one video. "Every laugh, every happy moment would have been tainted by the knowledge of what was to come. It was selfish, maybe, but I chose happiness over the truth. I hope you can forgive me for that." How could I not forgive him? Still, a part of me ached for not having had the chance to be there for him, to help him carry that burden, to consciously cherish our final moments together. The next morning, I got up determined to defend Frank's last gift. His brothers would arrive in a few hours, and I needed to be ready to face them. Not just for myself, but for Frank and for everything he had sacrificed to create this sanctuary. What I didn't know was that Richard, Andrew, and Greg were bringing more than just legal claims. They were bringing Frank's last secret, one that he hadn't even discovered in time to tell me. At 10 o'clock, the gravel driveway announced the arrival of the Miller brothers. This time, in addition to the black SUV, there was a smaller car following them. I watched from the window as 4 people emerged from the vehicles. The 3 brothers and a woman I immediately recognized despite the distance. Jenna, my daughter, who should have been in Los Angeles finishing her semester at medical school, was there, walking alongside the men who sought to take our inheritance. My blood ran cold. How had they found her? Why was she with them? The betrayal seemed even more acute coming from my own daughter. Before I could fully process the situation, I opened the door. "Jenna, what are you doing here?" My 21-year-old daughter, with her father's same dark eyes, ran to hug me, but there was a tension in her demeanor. "Mum, my uncles explained everything about Dad and the ranch. Why didn't you tell me?" "She said they've discovered oil here, that it's worth millions." "Uncles?" The word sounded bitter in my ears. "Jenna, you barely know these men." "But they're Dad's family," she protested. "Uncle Richard showed me pictures of Dad as a kid. He told me stories about his childhood here." Richard stepped forward, extending his hand as if we were old friends. "Ellen, I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. We came with a fair proposal that benefits all of us, as a family." I refused to shake his hand. "Come in. But I want to make it clear that any discussion will be based on the legal documents Frank left, not on manipulative emotional appeals." The living room that yesterday had felt like a sanctuary of beauty now became a battlefield. The Miller brothers settled in like invaders planning a conquest, while Jenna sat uncomfortably between us, clearly torn in her loyalties. "Our proposal is simple," Richard began, his tone falsely reasonable. "We divide the property into 4 equal parts, 1 for you, 1 for Jenna, and 2 for us 3 brothers. The oil drilling rights would be managed jointly." "That seems fair, Mum," Jenna interjected, already convinced by their rhetoric. "That way we keep the ranch in the family and we all benefit." I looked at my daughter, trying not to show my disappointment that she had been so easily manipulated. "Jenna, there's a lot you don't know about this situation. Your father left videos explaining everything." "Videos?" Her eyes widened. "Dozens of them, including one specifically for you, explaining why he kept secrets about his illness and about his brothers." Richard exchanged alarmed glances with Andrew. "What videos are those?" Instead of answering, I opened the laptop and navigated to the folder titled "For Jenna When in Doubt." Frank had anticipated this exact moment. "Watch this first," I suggested to my daughter. "Then we can discuss any proposal." While Jenna watched the video with headphones, a specific request from Frank so that his words would be for her ears only, I watched the expressions on the Miller brothers' faces. They were visibly uncomfortable, sensing that they had underestimated how much Frank had prepared. Jenna's face gradually changed as she watched, showing surprise, sadness, and finally, indignation. When it ended, she took off the headphones with trembling hands. "You lied to me," she said, turning to the men she had called uncles just hours before. "My father wasn't the bastard son who abandoned the family. You drove him out, you sold his horse, you stole his part of the inheritance." "Those are half-truths told by a bitter man," Andrew defended himself. Frank was always dramatic about the past. Richard tried to regain control of the situation. "Regardless of old family feuds, we're here to solve the present. This property has belonged to the Millers for generations." "And now it belongs to me," I stated with a calm I didn't feel. "Frank bought it legally from your father. I have all the documents, even the original signed, registered, and notarized contract." "Our father was not in his right mind when he sold the ranch," Greg argued, speaking for the first time. "He was an alcoholic. He was in debt. We can easily contest the legal validity of the sale." "You can try," I replied, getting up to get the blue folder Frank had prepared. "But your brother anticipated that as well." I opened the folder and took out a set of documents. "This is a complete psychological evaluation of your father, conducted 1 week before the sale of the ranch, attesting to his full mental capacity. And these are financial reports showing that Frank paid the market value for the property, not a discounted price as you suggest." Richard visibly paled. "That could be falsified." "I doubt a judge would agree, considering it was all notarized by multiple independent professionals," I said. I took out another document. "And here's something that might particularly interest you. A signed declaration from your father, confirming that Frank was, in fact, his legitimate son and had every right to buy the family property." The silence that followed was absolute. The Miller brothers had arrived expecting to find an emotionally vulnerable widow and a naive niece. Instead, they were facing an impenetrable wall patiently built by Frank over the years. "That's not all," I continued, pressing my advantage. "Frank discovered the potential for oil long before any public announcement. He hired geologists who did a complete mapping of the property." I took out another set of documents, detailed maps showing reserve estimates, quality analysis, and value projections. The eyes of the three brothers widened as they realized the extent of the information Frank had gathered. "Most of the oil isn't in the eastern section of the property, where the companies are currently drilling," I explained. "It's in the western section, in the seemingly worthless hills, which you conveniently excluded from your fair proposal." Andrew adjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "That's speculation." "3 independent evaluations agree," I retorted. "The real value of this property is approximately 5 times greater than what you're suggesting in negotiations." Jenna, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. "You tried to use me to get to my mom. You talked about honoring my dad's memory while trying to steal what he built for us." "That's not exactly it," Richard tried to argue, but his position was already clearly weakened. "I ask you to leave my property now," I stated firmly. "If you want to continue this discussion, you can contact my lawyer." For a moment, I thought Richard was going to protest. His face hardened, his eyes darkening in a way that reminded me unsettlingly of Frank's father in the few photographs I had seen. But then, with a sharp gesture, he got up. "This isn't over, Ellen." "Actually, Richard, it is," I replied, keeping my voice controlled. Frank made sure of that. After they left, Jenna collapsed on the couch, the tears finally coming. "How could I be so stupid, Mum? They called me right after the funeral, saying they were Dad's family, that they wanted to get to know me, to share memories of him I never had." I sat next to her, putting my arm around her shoulders. "They played on your grief, honey. They used your vulnerability and your desire for a connection with your father. Don't blame yourself for that." "Dad knew he was dying," she whispered. "This whole time. Why didn't he tell us?" He didn't want our last years together to be defined by anticipated mourning, I explained, repeating the words Frank had shared in the videos. He wanted us to live fully, not to wait for the inevitable. That afternoon, I showed Jenna the stables, introduced her to the horses, and we walked around the property that her father had so lovingly restored. Thomas accompanied us, sharing stories about the ranch's transformation over the past few years. Mr. Frank worked tirelessly on this place, he told Jenna. Every detail had to be perfect, because he said you and your mother deserved only the best. In a particularly moving moment, Thomas led us to a gentle hill overlooking the entire property. There, in the shade of a 100-year-old goldenrod tree, we found a small bronze plaque set in a stone. Storm, my first friend and my greatest teacher. May this land be a refuge for others as you were for me. That was his horse when he was a boy, Thomas explained softly. He had this memorial made in the first month after he bought the ranch. Jenna knelt in front of the plaque, touching the engraved letters with her fingers. I never knew Dad had a horse. He almost never talked about his childhood. Some pains are too deep to be expressed, I replied, understanding now the extent of the wounds Frank had silently carried. In the following days, Jenna and I continued to watch the videos Frank had left. It was like having him back, even if it was just in digital images. He had created messages for specific dates, birthdays, graduations, even for Jenna's future wedding. Each video revealed another aspect of his love for us and another piece of the puzzle of his secret life. But the peace wouldn't last long. 2 weeks after our confrontation with the brothers, I received a call from David, the lawyer. Ellen, Richard Miller has filed a lawsuit formally contesting the will and the property transfer. They're claiming that Frank was mentally incapacitated when he bought the ranch, due to his medical condition. That's absurd, I protested. Frank was perfectly lucid until his final moments. It's a delay tactic, David explained. They don't expect to win. They just want to create enough legal complications to force you into a settlement. The idea of a long legal battle frightened me. Jenna would need to go back to college in Los Angeles in a few days, and I would have to face this alone. Even with all the documentation Frank had left, the prospect of fighting 3 determined men with substantial resources was intimidating. That night, as I watched another video from Frank, he seemed to be answering my unspoken concerns. I know it seems scary, Ellen, he said, his face serious. My brothers never liked to lose. But there's something I haven't shown you yet. Something that will guarantee your safety in case they decide to take things to the extreme. He instructed me to find Thomas and ask him to show me the contingency file. What I found took my breath away. In the oldest barn on the property, behind carefully stacked hay bales, Thomas revealed a hidden door that led to an underground basement. The lights came on automatically as I went down the stairs, revealing a space that could only be described as a war room. On the walls, detailed maps of the property marked with the precise locations of oil deposits. In meticulously organized files, there were incriminating documents on each of the Miller brothers, records of tax evasion, market manipulation, and misappropriation of client funds. Frank had gathered an arsenal of information that could destroy all 3 men's careers and reputations. Mr. Frank was a cautious man, Thomas observed as I leafed through the documents, stunned. He said he would never use this unless they forced him to. He called it family betrayal insurance. How did he get all this? I asked, marveling at the extent of the investigation. Years of patience and planning, Thomas replied. After he discovered the illness, he became even more methodical. He said he wouldn't be here to protect you and your daughter, so he needed to leave you the tools to protect yourselves. Among the documents was also the most surprising revelation: evidence that Frank's father had had another family in Arizona, unknown even to Richard, Andrew, and Greg. Frank had located two younger half-brothers, born from an extramarital affair that had lasted for decades. Did he keep in touch with those brothers? I asked Thomas. No. He said he had no right to interrupt their lives with old stories, but he checked on their information annually, just to know that they were okay. That was the Frank I knew, compassionate even when it came to strangers, protective without being intrusive. The contrast with the brothers I had just met couldn't have been more stark. Armed with this new knowledge, I sent a succinct message to David. I have information that will completely change our strategy. Come to the ranch tomorrow. 3 days later, Richard Miller called. His voice, once confident and condescending, now sounded tense. We're withdrawing the will contest, he informed me abruptly. We accept the property as legally yours. What a sudden change, I commented, keeping my voice neutral. An uncomfortable silence preceded his response. Your lawyer presented some convincing information on why we should reconsider our position. David had only handed over a small sample of the documents Frank had compiled, just enough to demonstrate that we had the power to destroy the Miller brothers, without revealing the full extent of what we knew. I'm glad we could resolve this civilly, I replied. Is there any other matter you would like to discuss? Another, even longer silence. I have a medical condition, Richard finally admitted. The same one Frank had, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. I need a partial liver transplant, and our family's blood type is rare. Your other brothers aren't a match. Jenna might be. The audacity of the request shocked me. After trying to steal our inheritance, they still expected Jenna to risk her health to save Richard. That's a matter for Jenna to decide, I replied coldly. But you should know that Frank found 2 of your other half-brothers, sons of your father, with a woman in New Mexico. They likely share the same rare genetic markers and could be compatible donors. The shock was audible in Richard's sharp intake of breath. Other brothers? That's not possible. Their contact information is in an envelope I'll leave with my lawyer, I continued. I recommend you approach them with humility and honesty, not with the same manipulative tactics you used with Jenna. When I hung up, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. The Miller brothers were no longer a threat, and I had honored Frank's wish to use that information only as a last resort, without publicly exposing their crimes. That night, I sat on the porch of the ranch, admiring the sunset over the hills that were now unquestionably mine. The horses grazed peacefully in the nearby field, and the breeze carried the sweet scent of goldenrod trees in bloom. We did it, Frank, I murmured to the orange-tinted sky. Your plan worked. With the threat of the Miller brothers neutralized, I could finally explore the ranch without the weight of anxiety. Every room in the main house revealed another aspect of Frank's meticulous care. From the library filled with my favorite authors, to the kitchen equipped with all the appliances I had ever mentioned wanting. It was during that more relaxed exploration that I discovered a locked door in the east hallway. Small and discreet, almost camouflaged by the wall decor, I would have completely ignored it if it hadn't been for a specific video I watched that morning. There's a place in the house that I saved especially for you, Ellen, he had said in the recording. A space just for you that might be the true heart of all this. The key is the same one that opened the ranch, but there's a secret. You need to turn it 3 times to the left before turning it to the right. Intrigued, I followed his instructions. The lock mechanism gave a soft click, and the door opened to reveal what could only be described as a materialized dream. A complete art studio stretched out before me, bathed in perfect light from strategically placed windows, with easels, blank canvases of all sizes, and shelves organized with paints, brushes, pastels, and all the materials an artist could desire. Oh my gosh, I whispered, turning slowly to take in every detail. On the walls, Frank had hung empty frames of various sizes, each with a small plaque. For Ellen's vision of Golden Tree, for a mother's portrait of Jenna, for the sunrise in the hills as seen by Ellen. In a corner, a flat box caught my attention. I opened it with trembling hands and found what I never thought I would see again. My paintings from college, works I thought had been lost in our many moves. Frank had preserved them all those years, saving them until I was ready to pick up the brush again. On top of the pile was my graduation self-portrait, the young artist full of dreams and possibilities that I had been before practical life took over. Next to it, a note in Frank's precise handwriting. "She's still there, my love. The artist you always were, even when the brushes were put away. I've given you the space, the time. The inspiration is up to you." I sank onto the bench next to the window, crying openly. Not just from renewed grief for Frank, but from the realization of how much he truly knew me, perhaps better than I knew myself. He had seen the sleeping artist in me during all those years I taught literature in schools, always postponing the dream of painting for later. In the following days, I timidly began to relearn the rhythm of the brush against the canvas. My hands were hesitant at first, but I gradually regained my confidence. I painted the horses, the mountains at sunrise, Jenna's profile against the afternoon sky. Every brushstroke was a conversation with Frank, a silent thank you for the gift he had given me. Not just the physical ranch, but the permission to rediscover myself. Meanwhile, the oil issue remained. Several companies had made substantial offers for the drilling rights, some reaching values that made me dizzy just to imagine. The potential wealth under those hills could guarantee financial security for Jenna, and for me, for generations. But something kept me from signing any agreement. Every morning, as I walked the property, observing the untouched nature, the majestic goldenrod trees, the wildlife that found refuge there, I questioned if oil extraction was the destiny Frank had envisioned for Golden Tree. The answer came, like so many others, in one of his videos. This one, catalogued for 6 months after his death, was specific about the issue. "About the oil, Ellen," he began, looking almost uncomfortable. "When I discovered the deposits, I was initially tempted by the financial security they would provide. But the more time I spent transforming this ranch, the more I realized that its true value isn't in what's hidden beneath it, but in what flourishes on top." He paused, looking out the window behind him, the same view I now contemplated daily. "The oil companies are going to make you tempting offers. I rejected all of them while I was alive, but the decision is now yours. If you choose to sell the rights, make sure the extraction methods are as non-invasive as possible. But there's another option I recently discovered." Frank then explained about an environmental conservation program that paid landowners to keep ecologically sensitive areas untouched. Golden Tree, with its unique biodiversity and springs that fed the region's rivers, qualified fully. "The payments are less than the potential value of the oil," he admitted, "but they're enough for you to live comfortably, maintain the ranch, and maybe even expand the horse breeding if you wish. And most importantly, the land would remain untouched, a refuge just as it was for me when I was a boy." 2 days later, I definitively rejected all the oil offers and began the process of registering Golden Tree as a private environmental reserve. The decision brought a sense of peace that no amount of money could provide. It was then that Thomas approached me with another surprising revelation. "Mr. Frank left one more unfinished project," he explained, leading me to a set of small buildings near the entrance of the ranch, away from the main house. He began renovating them in the last few months, but he didn't have time to finish. The 5 rustic cottages were in different stages of renovation. Frank had begun transforming them into cozy cabins, each with a view of a different area of the property. What was his plan for these places? I asked, imagining some lodging for additional employees. Thomas smiled. He wanted to create a small retreat for artists, a place where painters, writers, and musicians could spend seasons creating, inspired by nature. He talked about how you always supported emerging artists when you were teaching, how you felt the lack of places like this when you were young. The idea was so perfectly frank, generous even in his plans after death, finding ways to extend opportunities he himself had never had. And it was also perfectly suited to me, combining my love for art with my past as an educator. Let's finish this, I decided immediately, exactly as he planned it. In the following months, I oversaw the completion of the cottages, each one equipped with basic supplies for different art forms. I worked with Thomas to develop an artist residency program that would select talented but under-resourced creators for a 3-month creative retreat at Golden Tree. I named the project the Frank Miller Artist Residency, and the first class of 5 artists arrived exactly 1 year after his death. Watching them discover the ranch, become inspired by the same views that now fed my own paintings, brought a sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced since my teaching days. Jenna, initially skeptical of my decision to stay at the ranch and reject the oil offers, gradually understood the vision that was coming to fruition. During her college breaks, she began to offer basic medical exams for nearby rural communities, using one of the cottages as a makeshift clinic. "I think I finally understand why Dad created this place," she confided to me one night as we watched the stars on the porch. "It's not just about preserving something from the past. It's about creating something new from what was broken." The wisdom in her words moved me. Frank had transformed a place of painful memories into a sanctuary not just for us, but for dozens of other people who now benefited from his vision, expanded by our hands. 6 months after the residency program's inauguration, I received an unexpected letter. The envelope had the seal of a Los Angeles hospital and contained a single sheet of paper with a brief message. "Ellen, I received a successful transplant from a donor who prefers to remain anonymous, although I have my suspicions about his identity. The disease I shared with Frank is in remission. I wanted you to know that I found our other brothers. They are good people, better than I was. Richard." I put the letter away without sharing it with anyone. Some cycles need to close quietly, without fanfare or public recognition. If Jenna had decided to donate part of her liver to save the uncle who had tried to harm us, that was a personal choice she had made without feeling the need to discuss it. Forgiveness, as I was learning, sometimes manifests in silent acts that require no witnesses. In my studio, I started a new series of paintings, not just of the horses or landscapes of Golden Tree, but portraits of Frank based on frames from the videos. In each canvas, I captured a different aspect of him: the meticulous planner, the devoted lover, the protective father, the man with invisible wounds who never let them make him bitter. I usually painted at sunset, when the golden light flooded the studio and created that ethereal quality that only exists for a few precious minutes. Sometimes I had the strange feeling that he was there with me, watching with silent approval as I reclaimed the artist who had been dormant for so long. "I'm painting again, Frank," I once whispered to the empty studio. "You always knew I would, didn't you?" The gentle wind rustled the curtains, as if in response, and in that moment, I realized that Frank had given me more than a ranch, more than financial security, more than a second chance at art. He had given me a new way of living, not as a survivor of a devastating loss, but as the guardian of a legacy of love that continued to grow and evolve even after he was gone. Golden Tree wasn't just a physical place. It was the materialization of Frank's deep knowledge of me, a love so attentive that it anticipated my needs and desires before I even recognized them. And now I was doing the same for others, creating space for artists to discover their own voices, just as Frank had done for me. Time has a strange quality when you're grieving. The first months drag on endlessly, each day a battle just to get up and keep going. Then, all of a sudden, you realize a whole year has passed in the blink of an eye. It was with that surprising awareness that I faced the last video of the initial series Frank had prepared. A message for the first anniversary of his death. Jenna had come from Los Angeles especially so we could watch it together. Sitting side by side on the living room couch, with the gentle autumn rain drumming against the windows, we watched the familiar face appear on the screen. "Hello, my loves," Frank began, his gentle smile so painfully familiar. "If you're watching this, it means you've survived the first year without me, perhaps the hardest of all. I hope the daily videos helped, that my presence, even if virtual, softened the path." We exchanged emotional glances, Jenna and I. The videos had been anchors on stormy days, small oases of connection when Frank's absence seemed unbearable. From now on, the videos will be less frequent, one per month in the next year, then only on special occasions. Not because my love has lessened, but because I know you're finding your own way. My constant presence may eventually become more of a hindrance than a comfort. His wisdom, even in this respect, was impressive. Frank had understood that his daily voice, if it continued indefinitely, could prevent us from moving forward. However, there is a final folder on the laptop that I haven't revealed yet. It's titled, "When You're Ready." It contains only one video, and you'll know when the right time is to watch it. The message continued with precious memories, reflections on our time together, and hopes for our future. When it ended, Jenna and I remained silent for long minutes, each absorbed in private thoughts. "Do you think we're ready for the final video?" Jenna finally asked. I considered the question carefully. "I don't know. Your father seemed to believe that we would recognize the right moment." We decided to wait. There was something comforting in knowing that a last message was waiting for us, like a treasure saved for a future moment when we needed special guidance. The following months brought significant changes to Golden Tree. The artist residency program flourished, attracting candidates from all over the country. The Environmental Reserve received official certification, guaranteeing permanent protection for the local biodiversity. And my own art began to attract attention beyond the immediate circle of friends and visitors. It all started when Monica Sanchez, a renowned art critic who visited the ranch to learn about the residency program, saw my paintings in the studio. "These works have a quality I don't see often," she commented, studying my series of portraits of Frank. "There's an emotional honesty, a duality between loss and celebration that is deeply moving." 2 weeks later, I received an invitation to exhibit at the gallery she managed in Los Angeles. The idea of sharing my very personal art with the world was simultaneously terrifying and exciting. I had never imagined returning to the art world I had abandoned decades ago. "What do you think your dad would say about this?" I asked Jenna during a video call, showing her the invitation. Her response was immediate and confident. "He would be absolutely thrilled, Mum. Wasn't that the whole point of this place? To bring the artist back to the world?" I accepted the invitation. The months of preparation were intense, selecting works, creating new pieces specifically for the exhibition, and confronting all the doubts and insecurities that arose. On the opening night, I was stunned to see a line forming outside the gallery. The exhibition, titled "Golden Tree: Portraits of an Announced Love," attracted critics, collectors, and art lovers who seemed genuinely moved by the story behind the works. "Your paintings capture something rare," an influential critic commented. "The transformation of grief into celebration, the documentation of a love that transcends even death." In the midst of the bustle, I noticed 3 men observing discreetly from the back of the gallery. Richard, Andrew, and Greg Miller. Our eyes met briefly. Richard gave a slight nod before the three of them quietly left. No words were exchanged, no formal acknowledgement was needed. Their presence was simultaneously a white flag and an admission that Frank had won in every way that mattered. When I returned to the ranch after the successful exhibition, I found a letter from the university hospital where Jenna was studying medicine. They were interested in establishing a partnership with Golden Tree, using part of the property for an equestrian rehabilitation program for children with special needs. Your husband's horses could serve a purpose beyond beauty, the program director wrote. They could become instruments of healing. The proposal seemed so perfectly aligned with Frank's vision that I could almost hear his voice approving the idea. In less than 6 months, we built specialized facilities, trained the horses, and received the first group of children. Watching those little faces light up during the hippotherapy sessions, seeing confidence grow in previously withdrawn children, brought a new dimension to Golden Tree. The ranch was becoming not only a refuge for artists, not only an environmental sanctuary, but also a place of healing. It was on one afternoon, after a particularly touching session with a little girl who had spoken her first words during equestrian therapy, that I knew it was time. Jenna was visiting that weekend, and as I shared the story of the little patient during dinner, I saw the same recognition in her eyes. "We're ready," she said simply. That night, after dinner, we opened the laptop and located the folder. When you're ready, the single file contained a recording different from all the others. Instead of the office or the library where Frank usually filmed, the video showed him standing on the hill where the memorial to Storm now was. "Hello, my dears," he began, the wind gently ruffling his hair. He was visibly thinner than in the other videos, probably filmed in the more advanced stages of his illness. "If you're watching this, it means Golden Tree has become more than a property. It's become a home, a mission, a purpose, and it means you're ready for the final secret I kept." He looked directly at the camera, an intensity in his eyes that made me hold my breath. "When I bought this ranch, I didn't know about the oil. I bought it for the horses, for the space for Ellen to paint, for the peace I never found here as a boy. But a few weeks later, while I was walking around the property, I found something buried near this goldenrod tree." Frank moved to the side, revealing a small wooden box in his hands. "It was my mother's journal. My father said she died in childbirth, but I discovered she ran away when I was only a few months old. Not out of a lack of love for me, but out of fear of the man my father had become." Jenna squeezed my hand, both of us absorbing this revelation. In this journal, she describes how she hid something of great value on the ranch before leaving, not for herself, but for me, for when I grew up. Something my father searched for obsessively for years, until drinking finally destroyed his health. Frank carefully turned the pages of the journal. Instead of immediately revealing the discovery, she brought it home to properly document it. When she realized she needed to flee my father, she hid everything on the ranch, planning to return when it was safe. But she never got that chance. She died in an accident a few years later, before she could retrieve the items or find me. Frank looked back at the camera, his eyes shining with emotion. "Using the map and instructions in the journal, I found the place. It's intact, sealed exactly as she left it. I didn't take anything out, because this discovery rightfully belongs to the National Historical Heritage. But I wanted you to know, the true treasure of this land was never the oil. It's a lost piece of our history, preserved by an extraordinary woman I never had the chance to know." He closed the journal carefully, returning it to the box. "In the secret drawer of the main desk, you will find this box with the journal and the map. The decision on what to do with this discovery is yours now, but I suggest you complete the work my mother started. Make sure these artifacts get to the place where they belong, where they can be studied and appreciated by future generations. When the video ended, Jenna and I remained silent for a long moment, processing this final revelation. Then, as if moved by the same impulse, we got up and went to the desk. The secret drawer opened easily when pressed in the right spot, revealing the wooden box identical to the one we saw in the video. The journal was fascinating. The detailed observations of a passionate scientist were mixed with the concerns of a desperate young mother. Frank's mother, Elizabeth, described her discovery with academic precision. A set of documents and small artifacts from a 17th century Jesuit mission that had been completely erased from historical records, possibly due to conflicts with the Spanish crown at the time. The documents suggest that the mission housed indigenous people who had escaped slavery, I read aloud to Jenna. Elizabeth believed this could rewrite the history of indigenous resistance in this region. The map was detailed, marking a specific spot in the western hills of the property, coincidentally the same area where the largest oil deposits were located. Now I fully understood why Frank had been so firm about protecting that land. "We have to look for this tomorrow," Jenna suggested, her eyes shining with the same curiosity that always animated her father's gaze. The next morning, we carefully followed the map through the most remote area of the ranch. The marked spot was under a peculiar rock formation, partially hidden by dense vegetation. It took us almost an hour to locate the entrance, a small natural opening in the rock, artificially widened and then cleverly disguised. What we found inside left us speechless. A natural cavern transformed into a hiding place, preserved by the dry climate of the region and by its isolation. Boxes sealed with beeswax contained parchment documents in surprisingly good condition. Small ceremonial artifacts, crucifixes carved with indigenous symbols, ceramic beads, ritual instruments that blended Catholic and native traditions. "She was right," Jenna whispered, carefully examining one of the documents. "This is extraordinary." Following Frank's final instructions, we hired a team of respected archaeologists to properly document and preserve the discovery. The National Museum showed immense interest, classifying it as a revolutionary discovery for understanding the relationships between Jesuits and indigenous peoples in the colonial period. The formalization of the discovery brought unexpected attention to Golden Tree. Journalists, historians, and academics visited regularly, fascinated as much by the artifacts as by the personal story behind their discovery. The young archaeologist who hid them to protect them, the son she never met, but who ended up completing her mission. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, I received a visit that closed another circle of the story. A woman of about 70, with grey hair framing a face that looked strangely familiar to me. "My name is Celia Miller," she introduced herself. "I was married to Peter, the man your husband knew as his father." I invited her in, intrigued by her presence. We had coffee on the porch while she explained her connection to the story. "Peter was not Frank's biological father," she revealed calmly. "Elizabeth was already pregnant when they got married. The real father was a fellow archaeologist who died during an expedition before the birth. Peter promised to raise the baby as his own, but after Elizabeth fled, anger and a feeling of betrayal consumed him. He transferred that resentment to Frank." This revelation explained so much about the tumultuous relationship Frank had had with the man he believed was his father. "How do you know all this?" I asked, absorbing the magnitude of this new piece of the puzzle. "Elizabeth wrote to me years later," Celia explained, "when she found out I had married Peter. She wanted me to understand the whole story, maybe in the hope that I could protect Frank in some way. Unfortunately, by the time I received the letter, it was too late. Frank was gone, and Peter was too sick to change." She took an aged envelope from her bag. I thought you should have this. It's the last letter Elizabeth wrote before she died, addressed to Frank. It was never delivered. I accepted the envelope with trembling hands, feeling the weight of those never-read words, of that maternal love never fully expressed. "Do you think Frank suspected?" I asked. "About his biological father?" "I don't know," Celia replied honestly. "But I think it's significant that he followed his mother's path in a way. They both preserved precious things for the future. They both protected what mattered, even if it was in silence." After Celia left, I sat in the studio with the unread letter, uncertain what to do. Part of me felt I should preserve it along with the journal and the artifacts. Another piece of this extraordinary story. Another part believed that the words of a mother to a son were too sacred to become objects of an exhibition. Finally, I decided to share it only with Jenna, the only other person with a rightful claim to this part of Frank's history. When she arrived for her monthly visit, we read it together by candlelight in the studio. Elizabeth's words were of regret, explanation, and above all, love. She described how she had tried to return for Frank years later, only to find that Peter had moved without a trace. How she had spent years searching, until illness prevented her from continuing. "What hurts me the most," she wrote, "is knowing that you may have grown up believing you weren't loved. I want you to know that every day away from you was agony, that my last thought will be of you, my son, hoping that you have found happiness and purpose even without my presence." We cried together, Jenna and I, for all the lost connections, for the silences Frank carried, for the mother he never knew loved him so deeply. But there was also a strange sense of completeness. The circle was finally closing, the secrets were coming to light. "Dad did it, didn't he?" Jenna reflected, wiping away her tears. "He transformed all these broken stories into something whole." "Yes," I agreed, looking out the window at the ranch that was flourishing under our stewardship. "I think that was his greatest ability, to see beauty and possibility where others saw only ruins." In the following months, Golden Tree expanded its mission even further. In addition to the artist residency and hippotherapy program, we developed an educational center in partnership with universities, focused on the indigenous and colonial history of the region. The discovered artifacts, now properly preserved at the National Museum, were reproduced for educational purposes, allowing students and visitors to understand the importance of the Jesuit mission and its significance to the history of the United States. My art continued to evolve, inspired not only by the natural beauty of the ranch, but also by the layers of history and meaning we continuously uncovered. I started a new series, Personal Archaeologies, exploring how objects and places carry memories and stories invisible to the casual eye. One afternoon, while I was painting in the studio, I received an unexpected call from Richard Miller. "Ellen." His voice sounded different, less arrogant, more thoughtful. "I'm calling to inform you that we are formally dissolving any legal challenge related to Golden Tree. The documents are being sent to your lawyer." "Thank you for letting me know," I replied cautiously. There was a pause. "I also wanted to thank you." He continued to surprise me. "The information about our other brothers changed a lot of things for me, for all of us. Did you find them?" "Yes, they're remarkable people. They didn't deserve to be denied as they were. We're trying to build some kind of relationship now." After hanging up, I reflected on how Frank's secrets continued to create ripples of transformation, even after his death. The brothers who had tried to usurp his inheritance were now facing their own family truths, possibly finding some redemption in the process. As the second year without Frank approached its end, I realized that something fundamental had changed. Grief was still present, a silent companion that would probably never completely leave me, but it no longer defined me. Golden Tree was no longer just the last gift of a deceased husband. It was a living, evolving organism, nurtured by many hands, many stories, many intertwined purposes. On a particularly glorious spring morning, I found myself back under the 100-year-old goldenrod tree, where Frank had placed the memorial for Storm. The horses grazed peacefully in the field below, the green hills stretched to the horizon, and the distant sound of laughter came from the educational center, where a group of children was learning about the history of the artifacts. "Look at what we built from what you started," I murmured to the air, scented with goldenrod flowers. "I hope you're proud." A gentle breeze rustled the golden leaves above, making small yellow petals rain down around me like cosmic confetti. I'm not particularly superstitious, but in that moment, I felt deeply that Frank was responding in his own way. I returned to the studio with renewed inspiration, starting a new canvas. Not a portrait of Frank this time, but a self-portrait. The woman I had become, stronger, wiser, standing firm in a field of goldenrod trees, looking not at the past, but at the horizon of possibilities opening up before me. 5 years have passed since I found Frank's secret key. Golden Tree flourished beyond any expectation, transforming into a vibrant cultural, educational, and therapeutic center that benefited thousands of people annually. The artist residency program was now nationally recognized, with a 2-year waiting list. The original cottages had been complemented by a collective studio and a small gallery where the residents could exhibit their creations. Artists who passed through Golden Tree frequently mentioned in interviews how the place had transformed their perspectives and creative processes. The educational center, initially focused only on the archaeological discovery, expanded to include programs on environmental sustainability and the unique flora and fauna of the region. Schools from all over the state regularly brought students, and we developed scholarships for young people from underprivileged communities interested in history, archaeology, or conservation. The hippotherapy, started as a small project in partnership with the university hospital, grew into a complete therapeutic center. Jenna, now a doctor specializing in pediatric neurology, oversaw the program on her days off, bringing updated scientific knowledge to improve treatment protocols. As for me, my artistic journey had taken an unexpected turn. After 3 successful exhibitions in Los Angeles and Chicago, I was invited for a residency in Europe, followed by an international exhibition that brought my personal archaeologies to audiences I never imagined reaching. It was strange, at 54 years old, to find myself in the midst of a flourishing artistic career, the one that should have started 3 decades earlier, if not for the detour life had imposed. But there was a richness in my works that perhaps wouldn't exist if I had followed a more conventional path. The layers of experience, loss, rediscovery, and renewal brought a depth that critics often highlighted as the differentiator of my work. On a particularly meaningful afternoon, I received an email that made me sit up abruptly, my heart racing. It was from the National Arts Foundation, informing me that I had been selected to receive the Artistic Lifetime Achievement Award, a prestigious recognition usually given to artists with much longer careers than mine. Your unique journey, starting in youth, interrupted for decades and re-emerging with extraordinary force, represents the persistence of creative drive, the notification said. Your story and work serve as an inspiration for artists of all ages who face interruptions or detours in their creative paths. As I absorbed those words, my gaze wandered to the portrait of Frank that held a place of honor in the studio. Not one of the ones I had painted, but a simple photograph of him smiling, taken in our backyard in Los Angeles, a few years before his illness. It seemed as if he was smiling directly at me, sharing this moment of validation. "You always knew, didn't you?" I murmured to the photograph. "You always believed this day would come, even when I had completely given up." The awards ceremony coincided with the 6th anniversary of Frank's death. Initially, I considered asking for a postponement, reluctant to associate a celebration with such a painful date. But then I reconsidered. What more fitting way to honor the man who had restored my art than to receive this recognition on the day that marked his physical departure? Jenna accompanied me to the event in Los Angeles, dazzling in a navy blue dress that enhanced her increasing resemblance to her father. At 27, she combined Frank's practical determinations with my artistic sensibility, a perfect synthesis of the two of us. During my acceptance speech, I spoke openly about the journey that had led me there, the abandoned, youthful dreams, the years of teaching that, although gratifying, had left a creative void, and the devastating loss that, paradoxically, had opened the way for my artistic rebirth. My late husband Frank used to say that our greatest gifts often come disguised as our greatest losses, I shared with the attentive audience. He transformed a property of painful memories into a sanctuary that now benefits hundreds of people annually. And through that transformation, he allowed me to finally rediscover myself as an artist. After the ceremony, amidst the congratulations and glasses of champagne, Jenna pulled me into a quiet corner. "I have something to tell you," she said, a special sparkle in her eyes. "I'm pregnant." The news hit me with a wave of contradictory emotions: immense joy for the new life, sadness that Frank wasn't here to meet his grandson, and astonishment at how quickly life continued to move forward. "It's a boy," Jenna continued. "I want to name him Frank." I hugged my daughter, speechless to express everything I felt. A new Frank would enter our lives, bringing continuity to a story that seemed to have been brutally interrupted. That night, in my hotel room, I dreamed of Frank. Not a distressed dream of loss, like the ones that tormented me in the first year after his death, but a quiet, comforting presence. He was smiling, proud, as if to say, "See, life goes on in ways we can't foresee, but always with beauty." Upon returning to Golden Tree, I found a new energy to implement projects I had been considering for months. The first was the creation of scholarships for single mothers who wanted to go back to school or explore artistic careers. I named it the Elizabeth Program, in honor of Frank's mother, who never had the chance to resume her own career. We also started the construction of a specialized library on art, Indigenous history, and environmental conservation, open not only to residents and program participants, but to the entire local community. It was important to me that Golden Tree never became an isolated enclave of privilege, but remained rooted and accessible to the region that housed it. As little Frank grew in Jenna's belly, I began a special series of paintings documenting the waiting. Not just conventional pregnancy portraits, but visual explorations of continuity, of renewal, of the way time folds in on itself when generations overlap. When he was born, on a winter morning, I was the first person Jenna called. I rushed to the hospital in Phoenix, driving through the night with my heart full of anticipation. Holding that small bundle for the first time, I looked for my Frank's features on his face. "He has his father's chin," Jenna commented, exhausted but radiant. "And that dimple on the left side when he smiles." In the months that followed, I watched fascinated as small gestures and expressions of my late husband occasionally crossed the baby's face. A concentrated gaze, a particular way of frowning when he was annoyed. Genetically impossible, of course, since little Frank did not share blood with his namesake grandfather. Still, there were moments when the resemblance seemed so strong that it made me freeze for a moment. "It's just your imagination, Ellen," I would tell myself. "The mind sees what it wants to see." When the baby was almost 1 year old, Jenna decided to move permanently to Golden Tree. Her work at the hospital in Phoenix could be combined with remote research and supervision of the therapeutic center at the ranch. I want Frankie to grow up here, she explained, using the affectionate nickname we had already adopted for little Frank. Surrounded by art, nature, history, everything Dad valued. The main house, once so vast for just me, gained new life with the constant presence of Jenna and my grandson. Children's laughter echoed through the halls, colourful toys occupied previously empty corners, and the daily rhythm adjusted to the needs of a small child. It was during that period that I received an unexpected letter from the National University in New York. A historical research department had cross-referenced ancient records with information from Elizabeth's journal, discovering something extraordinary about the hidden Jesuit mission. The documents suggest that the mission housed not only runaway indigenous people, but also liberated African slaves and colonists persecuted for religious reasons, explained the professor leading the research. It represented a unique experiment in a multicultural community, right in the colonial period, actively challenging established power structures. This revelation elevated the historical importance of the discovery even further. Historians now considered the mission of the Santa Fe Refuge, as it was formally named based on the documents, as evidence of previously unknown intercultural resistance in colonial America. An unexpected consequence was the renewed interest of indigenous and African American communities in the region, who saw in the mission's history a validation of their own narratives of resistance. We began to receive requests for educational visits, and soon developed a specific program to share the story with these groups, always respecting their primary right to connect with this past. On one of those visits, I met Mrs. Jones, an elderly African-American woman whose knowledge of medicinal herbs and traditional practices was legendary in the region. After exploring the educational exhibition about the mission, she led me to a quiet corner. "This land was always special," she said simply. "Our ancestors knew its secrets. It's a good thing you're taking care of it now." Her words confirmed what I had already felt intuitively, that our stewardship of Golden Tree was not mere possession, but a form of temporary guardianship of something much older and more significant than our individual lives. One afternoon, while I was supervising the expansion of the library, Thomas approached me with a worried expression. "The Millers are here," he reported. "The 3 brothers, plus 2 people I don't recognize." My body instantly filled with tension. Despite the formal dissolution of any legal dispute, the unexpected arrival of the 3 brothers rarely meant good news. I found them in the main garden. Richard, Andrew, and Greg, accompanied by a man and a woman who shared unmistakable family features. "Ellen," Richard stepped forward, extending his hand. "I apologize for the unannounced visit. We wanted to formally introduce you to Roger and Mary, our brothers from New Mexico." The newly discovered half-siblings came forward, smiling shyly. Mary, especially, had the same kind of eyes as Frank, deep, thoughtful, with small wrinkles at the corners when she smiled. "It's an honor to meet you," Mary said softly. "We've heard so much about this place and the incredible work you've done here." The initial tension dissipated as we walked around the property, showing them the various ongoing projects. The 5 Miller siblings, 3 that Frank had known and rejected, 2 that he never had the chance to meet, seemed genuinely impressed with the transformation of Golden Tree. During coffee on the porch, Richard explained the real purpose of the visit. After we reconciled with Roger and Mary, we began to reflect on our family legacy, he said, exchanging glances with the other brothers. We realized that we wasted decades on petty resentments and greed, while Frank, even having suffered more than all of us, chose to create something positive. Andrew continued. "We decided to establish a family foundation to support causes related to historical and environmental preservation. We would like the first project to be a partnership with Golden Tree." The proposal they presented was substantial. Funding to significantly expand the educational center, allowing us to host more students from underprivileged communities and develop training programs in archaeology, environmental conservation, and the arts. Why? I asked directly, still cautious despite the apparent sincerity. After everything that happened? It was Greg, traditionally the quietest of the three, who responded. Because Frank was right, he said simply. About the ranch, about family, about how to live a life with purpose. It took us a long time to understand that, Mary added. And because maybe this is the only way to finally become the family we should have been from the beginning. We couldn't do that when Frank was alive, but maybe we can honor what he built now. I looked at those 5 faces, all carrying fragments of the same genetic legacy, all marked in different ways by the choices and secrets of a man who had long been gone. There was sincerity in their eyes, a genuine desire for redemption. Frank believed in second chances, I finally responded. He himself built one from the ruins of this ranch. I think he would approve of this partnership. In the following months, we worked to formalize the collaboration. The Miller Foundation for Preservation and Education became a reality, with a board of directors that included representatives from all branches of the family, as well as independent specialists in each area of activity. On a quiet afternoon, as I watched little Frank play happily with his great-uncles and great-aunt during a visit from the Miller family, I realized that Frank had won a final victory he never could have anticipated. He had not only protected his material legacy and fulfilled his dreams for the ranch, but he had inadvertently catalyzed the healing of family wounds that spanned generations. That night, I took out the laptop where I still kept Frank's videos. Although I rarely watched them now, I would occasionally return to them at significant moments. I selected a video from the second year, where he talked about forgiveness and second chances. Sometimes, Ellen, he said, his serene face filling the screen, the best kind of revenge is simply living well, not wasting energy on resentments. My brothers may have tried to harm me, but my true victory was building a life so full of love and purpose that their actions lost all power over me. I closed the laptop, thoughtful. Frank had never imagined that his brothers would find redemption. He had never planned that Golden Tree would become the catalyst for the reconciliation of his entire fragmented family. But somehow, the impulse for healing that he had started continued to expand in ever-widening circles, touching lives he hadn't even known. It was a kind of immortality that no monument could provide. The continuous, positive transformation resulting from choices made with love, even in the face of loss and suffering. 10 years after finding the mysterious key among Frank's belongings, Golden Tree had been completely transformed. What began as a secret refuge for a man who knew he was dying became a vibrant cultural, educational, and therapeutic center that benefited thousands of people annually. The partnership with the Miller Foundation allowed for expansions I never would have imagined possible. The educational center now included dormitories for students from distant regions, archaeological and environmental research labs, and a specialized library with more than 10,000 volumes. The artist residency program was expanded to include all forms of expression, not just visual arts, but also literature, music, dance, and theater. Resident artists frequently collaborated with the therapeutic center, developing innovative programs that combined artistic expression with healing processes. My own art continued to evolve. After 2 decades away from the brushes, I had made up for lost time with an almost frantic productivity in the early years. Now, at 59 years old, I worked with more deliberation and reflection. My works were regularly exhibited in national and international galleries, often contextualized by the extraordinary story of my late return to artistic practice. Little Frank, now 9 years old, grew up as an integral part of this unique environment. He was homeschooled, with private teachers complemented by in-person classes in the nearest city. But his true education came from the daily immersion in a world where art, science, history, and healing were organically intertwined. He was an extraordinary child, curious, compassionate, with an unusual ability to connect with people of all ages and backgrounds. He spent hours with the resident artists, absorbing techniques and perspectives. He accompanied archaeologists on small excavations, meticulously cataloguing every discovery. He assisted in hippotherapy sessions, developing an intuitive understanding of how horses responded to different emotional and physical needs. One particularly glorious autumn afternoon, I found him sitting alone under the 100-year-old goldenrod tree, the memorial for Storm at his feet, a sketchbook in his lap. "What are you drawing, Frankie?" I asked, sitting down beside him. He showed me a surprisingly skillful sketch for his age, the black Lusitano horse, the one Frank had chosen especially because it resembled the painting I had admired years ago. "I'm practicing horses," he explained seriously. "I want to paint like you one day." Something in the way he held the pencil, in the angle of his head as he critically evaluated his own work, was so reminiscent of Frank that it brought a lump to my throat. This child, who had never known his namesake grandfather, seemed to have inherited not only his name, but also fragments of his spirit. "Did Grandpa like to draw?" he asked casually, adding details to the horse's mane. "Not really," I replied, smiling at the memory. "Your grandpa was an engineer. He drew plans and projects, but he said he didn't have a talent for creative art. His admiration for art was as a viewer, not a creator." "But he built all this," the boy argued, gesturing broadly toward the property that stretched around us. "The house, the stables, the educational center. Isn't that art too?" The simple and profound perspective took me by surprise. "Yes," I replied slowly, considering the idea. "I think it is. Your grandpa saw potential where others saw only ruins. He imagined beauty where there was only pain. Maybe that's the essence of any true art." Frankie nodded, satisfied with this answer, and returned to his drawing. I looked over his shoulder and saw that he was painting the 100-year-old goldenrod tree with the memorial for Storm visible below. But he had added something, a figure sitting under the tree, just a silhouette, but clearly a man observing the ranch below. "It's him," Frankie explained, noticing my gaze. "Grandpa Frank, watching everything you guys built." A wave of emotion washed over me, not the sharp pain of loss that had dominated me in the early years, but something more complex, richer, a understanding that Frank lived not only in our memories, but in the structures he had created, in the programs we had developed from his initial vision, in the values that Frankie was now unconsciously absorbing. That night, after all the guests had left and the ranch returned to its normal rhythm, I walked alone to the 100-year-old goldenrod tree. The full moon bathed the landscape in silver, creating long shadows and transforming the familiar into something almost magical. I sat in the same spot where Frank had filmed his last video, the one that revealed the discovery of his mother's journal. The circle seemed complete now. Elizabeth had hidden historical artifacts to protect them, hoping her son would eventually find them. Frank had transformed the ranch of painful memories from his childhood into a sanctuary for me, and eventually for thousands of other people. And now, his namesake grandson was growing up here, absorbing and continuing that legacy in ways that were still revealing themselves. "We did it, Frank," I murmured to the quiet night. "Everything you dreamed of, and so much more." The gentle wind rustled the goldenrod leaves above, sending a delicate shower of golden petals down around me. That same cosmic response I had experienced years ago, when I was just beginning to understand the magnitude of what Frank had planned. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed clarity about the next chapter for Golden Tree and for myself. During breakfast, I shared my thoughts with Jenna. I've been thinking about expanding the art scholarship program, I explained, specifically for people in life transitions, those who gave up on creative dreams out of necessity and are now trying to rediscover them. Jenna smiled, understanding immediately. People just like you were. Exactly. I've been thinking about all the Ellens out there, people with dormant talents, interrupted by circumstances, responsibilities, expectations. How many potential artists, writers, musicians never find their way back? It's a wonderful idea, Jenna agreed. We can develop a specific residential program, maybe combined with mentorships to help them navigate the return to their creative fields. In the months that followed, we developed the Second Act program, an initiative dedicated specifically to late-in-life or returning artists. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of applications from people whose stories resonated with aspects of my own journey. A 67-year-old woman who had given up sculpture to raise 3 children alone, now returning to clay with arthritic but determined hands. A 55-year-old former banker who was finally pursuing his passion for photography after a cancer diagnosis went into remission. A 70-year-old retired professor trying to complete the novel he had started in his youth. Working with these re-emerging artists, I discovered a new dimension to my own practice. It was no longer just about creating my own works, but about facilitating the creative rebirth of others. The process brought a deep satisfaction that rivaled the pleasure of my own artistic achievements. On one significant night, while reviewing the applications for the next class of the program, I came across a name that made me pause. Celia Miller, the second wife of Frank's father. At 86 years old, she wished to return to the poetry she had abandoned 6 decades earlier. I was silenced by a difficult marriage, she wrote in her application. Now, in the twilight of my life, I want to reclaim my voice, maybe understand my own choices better through writing. Her acceptance into the program closed another circle. The woman who had tried without success to protect the young Frank from his father's resentment would now find her own creative rebirth in the sanctuary he had created. The 10th anniversary of Frank's death was approaching, and with it, an important realization. I no longer watched his videos regularly, not because I loved him less, but because his presence had transformed from something I sought externally to something that lived within me, in the decisions I made, in the way I saw the world. Still, on the eve of that anniversary, I felt an impulse to re-watch a specific video, the last of the regular series filmed to mark the end of the 2nd year after his departure. I sat in my studio, the soft lights creating an almost reverential atmosphere, and opened the familiar file. "Hello, my love," Frank began, his serene face filling the screen. "If you're watching this, we've completed 2 years of our post-mortem conversation, 2 years in which I tried to accompany you through grief, offering the comfort I could in these pre-recorded videos." He paused, looking directly at the camera as if he could truly see me on the other side of the screen, on the other side of time. "But now the time has come for us to change our relationship again. The remaining videos are only for special occasions, milestones you will know how to recognize when they arrive. Not because my love has lessened, but because your life needs to continue moving forward without my constant voice." I nodded in acknowledgement, even though he couldn't see. "Ellen, when I planned Golden Tree, I imagined a refuge for you, a place where you could rediscover your art and find peace after I was gone. What I couldn't foresee was how you would expand that initial vision, transforming it into something much greater than I ever dreamed." Silent tears ran down my face now, not from pain, but from a profound sense of connection across time and loss. My greatest wish was always that you would live fully, not just survive my death, but flourish despite it. That you would find purpose, joy, fulfillment. Seeing you now, across time, I know you've achieved that and so much more. How could he know? How could he have so accurately foreseen the trajectory my life would take? But that had always been Frank's magic, his ability to see potential where others saw only limitations. From now on, I trust that you will follow your own path, guided not by my recorded words, but by your own wisdom and vision. Golden Tree is yours to mold as you wish. What began as my final gift to you became your gift to the world. He smiled, that crooked smile that had always made my heart race, even after decades together. I loved you from the very first moment, Ellen, and I will continue to love you beyond the last. But now it's time for you to live completely in the present, no longer divided between our history and your future. You're ready. You always were. The video ended, the screen freezing on his smiling face. I remained sitting in the dark for a long time, absorbing his words, feeling the truth of them resonate within me. Frank was right. I was ready. I had been for some time. Ready to carry his legacy not as a burden of responsibility, but as a foundation upon which I would continue to build. Ready to exist fully in my own right, not just as the guardian of his vision. Ready to see Golden Tree not as Frank's final gift, but as a living, evolving organism to which many people, including me, had contributed. The next morning, exactly 10 years after finding the mysterious key among Frank's belongings, I woke up with a sense of peace and purpose that I hadn't felt since the beginning of our journey together. I dressed with care, choosing vibrant colours instead of the sober black that had dominated my wardrobe in the early years of mourning. At breakfast, Jenna noticed the change immediately. "You seem different today, Mum. Lighter." I smiled, pouring myself some coffee. "I watched your dad's last regular video last night, the one where he essentially frees me from our constant communication. And how do you feel about it?" "Strangely, I feel like a circle has closed, like we've completed something important together, even though we were separated by death." Frankie, swallowing his cereal, looked at us with curiosity. "Did Grandpa know all this was going to happen?" He gestured broadly, indicating the vibrant property around us. "Not exactly," I replied, considering the question carefully. "He planted the seeds. He created the conditions for the possibilities. But what flourished here came from many hands, many hearts, many minds." "Including ours," Jenna added. "Especially ours," I agreed. "Your dad gave us a start, but we, all of us, built something that he probably couldn't even imagine." After coffee, I walked to the studio and started a new painting. Not the series I had planned on the transformations of Golden Tree, but something completely different. An abstract representation of concentric circles in golden tones, interconnected, each one emerging from the previous one, expanding infinitely outward. It wasn't a portrait of Frank, nor a landscape of the ranch, not even an exploration of grief or loss. It was something new, a visual meditation on how love expands through time, how lives touch other lives in continuous waves of influence and transformation. As I worked, I felt a quiet certainty that Frank would approve of this new direction. Not because I needed his approval, but because we had arrived at this point together. He, through his meticulous plans and loving vision. I, through my determination to honor his legacy while creating my own. The key I had found among his belongings 10 years ago had opened much more than the gates of a forgotten ranch. It had opened a completely new path of possibilities, not just for me, but for all whose lives had been touched by Golden Tree. And as the afternoon sun bathed my studio in golden light, the same quality of light that Frank had carefully considered when designing this space, I felt not his absence, but his enduring presence in the world we had created together. Not as a ghost from the past, but as a living force of inspiration, transforming pain into beauty, loss into legacy, endings into new beginnings, an eternal cycle of renewal that would continue far beyond our individual lives. Frank's last promise had not just been the ranch, or the videos, or the financial security. It had been the promise of a future where I could not only survive without him, but flourish, creating, transforming, inspiring others, just as he had done for me. It was a promise that we had both fulfilled. Now, if you liked this story, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen, because in it, there's a story of betrayal and a twist like you've never seen before.